Throughout WrestleMania's 40-year history, a grand total of 46 individuals have made it to the pinnacle, the main event, the final match of the night. When you consider just how many active wrestlers there are at any given time who all have dreams of making it that far, those 46 are an exceptionally rare breed. To get to the main event of WrestleMania, you need hard work, drive, talent, and of course, a whole lot of luck. We've talked before here about the anointed ones in WWE, the guys who seem to have their time on top preordained. But what about the ones who had to work just a little bit harder or had to rely on a lot of dominoes falling to get there? This week, I'm going to rank them, my top 8 picks for the least likely WrestleMania main eventers throughout the years. Number 8, The Miz. Given his background and some of the things he had to endure early in his career, not to mention almost everything that's happened since Mania 27, yeah, it's kind of hard to believe The Miz once headlined. A former reality TV star who first came to our screens on season 10 of MTV's The Real World, Mike Mizanin eventually graced a WWE ring for the first time as part of the $1 Million Tough Enough. In a moment that was probably better for him in the end, Mike ended up placing second in the competition behind Daniel Puder, who fizzled out within a year, but The Miz impressed the company enough to earn a contract on his own. The Miz went through quite the awkward growing phase during those first couple of years, first as the host of SmackDown, then the host of the Raw Diva Search. It's also worth pointing out that because of his background, Mike spent a lot of time in his early years getting hazed by veterans like JBL and Chris Benoit, the kind of stuff that drove out plenty of young up-and-comers in that locker room over the years. It seemed as though Mizzles was destined to be part of the mid-card for life, but his Money in the Bank victory in 2010 changed that perception. Then the night after Survivor Series, The Miz shocked the world by cashing in his briefcase and beating Randy Orton to become the new WWE Champion, one of the company's least likely kingpins in its history. After surviving a murderer's row of challengers by the skin of his teeth, it was all but certain he would take that long death march to WrestleMania where he would promptly lose the belt to John Cena. But even though the main event was the cherry on top of the shit Sunday known as Mania 27, the A-lister retained once again with some help from The Rock. The Miz's accomplishment at WrestleMania 27 comes with a list of caveats about as long as that entrance ramp that night at the Georgia Dome. But looking at the bigger picture, the fact that this once presumed undeserving wannabe managed to earn his place in the history books is indeed awesome. Number 7, Yokozuna. Upon first glance, Yokozuna was just another evil foreigner gimmick, but there was a lot more to him that made him so much more than just a walking case of xenophobia. Before Kurt Angle or Brock Lesnar were around to shoot up the ranks, Yoko may have had the two of them beat, debuting in the fall of 1992, winning the '93 Royal Rumble, and main eventing WrestleMania 9 that April. With his scary agility mixed with his massive frame, fans were totally caught off guard that this mountain of a man would dominate their heroes so quickly and without prejudice. Yokozuna made history that night in Las Vegas, becoming the first heel in history to win the main event of WrestleMania, or so we thought. Hulk Hogan being shoehorned in at the very end notwithstanding, Yoko's rapid rise would end up becoming the norm, not an anomaly, as he would drive the Hulkster out of the Federation for nearly a decade to continue his run of dominance. Yokozuna's ascent to the top of the card may be considered unlikely because of how fast it happened, or the fact that the idea, the whole concept, seemed so dated for 1993, like something out of the Bruno or the early Hulkamania playbook. But it was his ability, combined with his eye-catching look, that made him an early force to be reckoned with, one of the earliest heartbeats of the bloodline. Number 6, AJ Styles. Way back in 2018, I made a fun little countdown ranking my ideas for dream matches AJ Styles could have in WWE, and my number 1 entrant was The Undertaker. To be honest, I never really thought the match was going to happen at all, much less at the biggest show of the year, but hey, 2020 was a crazy time. Simply put, the history of wrestling this past quarter century runs through the Phenomenal One. From his days as an innovative high flyer in the Indies, late era WCW, and early ROH, to becoming a tentpole figure in TNA from its inception and staying there for more than a decade, Styles epitomized the very opposite of what WWE was looking for in talent. But the wrestling landscape had changed a lot by the early 2010s, finally making it possible for Styles to arrive at the 2016 Royal Rumble in a surprise debut. Even after the monumental signing, it still seemed like lip service to the hardcore fans more than anything else, until the company put their money where their mouth was and put the top prize, the WWE title, around Styles' waist, not just once, but twice. Sure, few could have predicted that Mr. TNA would get a whiff of the WWE Championship, but the main event of WrestleMania? Get out of town. Styles would get his chance to close out the biggest show of the year, but in a manner nobody could have predicted. After some very disappointing performances that he refused to accept as a swan song, The Undertaker requested that AJ be his WrestleMania 37 opponent. If anyone could create movement and work around the dead man's limitations to provide a good final send-off, it would be Styles. But then COVID struck, and all of wrestling would look, well, a bit different for a while. The original premise of the Boneyard match had become a cinematic match, and benefited Undertaker more than a live in-ring confrontation in front of fans would have. The two capped off the first night of the first ever pre-taped WrestleMania in epic and memorable fashion, using the pandemic restrictions to their advantage in a pretty ingenious way. In the end, the Boneyard match became one of the greatest cinematic matches in company history, truly embracing the theatricality of the Undertaker character, and above all else, surpassing anything I could have foreseen in a dream match back in 2018. Number 5. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Now, I know what you're thinking. These two unlikely main eventers? How is that possible? I mean, one of them has a nickname that is literally Mr. WrestleMania. Obviously, it's easy to say that in hindsight, but it's important to remember just where these two future legends came from. If there was one person who could be considered a symbol of change in wrestling in the early 90s, it was Bret Hart. Coming up through the tag team ranks with his brother-in-law Jim Neidhart, Bret had the chance to break out as a singles wrestler and did so with aplomb. Winning the Intercontinental title from Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 1991, Hart became the standard bearer for the top of the mid-card for the next year, earning his first pay-per-view main event against Davey Boy Smith at Wembley Stadium. When Bret lost the title, it seemed the Hitman had finally hit his ceiling, but other circumstances worked out in his favor. For starters, there was a sudden de-emphasis on the muscle-headed stars of the past, and then WWF champ Ric Flair was suddenly hit with a case of severe vertigo. The company needed a new champion and fast, so Bret was given the ball and ran with it until the aforementioned WrestleMania 9. And even though he lost the belt to Yokozuna, his time in the main event scene was only just beginning. Shawn's career arc was similar to the Hitman's in many ways, starting off as a tag team wrestler, forging his own path as a singles star, winning Intercontinental and Tag Team Gold, on the way to his improbable coast-to-coast victory at the 1995 Royal Rumble. And even though they waited a whole year for him to actually win the big one, by this point there was no stopping the Heartbreak Kid. Now, Shawn Michaels is obviously a deserving talent, but truthfully, I don't think he would have gotten that chance, or at least not when he did, if it weren't for Bret Hart breaking that glass ceiling in the first place. In the modern era, seeing smaller stars in main event spots isn't quite as uncommon as it used to be, but fans can thank Bret and Shawn for breaking that mold in the mid-90s, helping to make wrestling evolve into what it is today. Number 4. Chris Benoit. Former WCW star? Check. Not the best at promos? Check. Short? Triple check. Chris Benoit had been cut from the same cloth as many of those Stampede legends of old. From a technical standpoint, the man was a perfect competitor, but often left something to be desired in the charisma department. Regardless, the fans admired and respected his hard work in the ring, which turned him into a huge fan favorite by 2004. Becoming the second ever person to win the Royal Rumble at number 1 seemed to be a huge validation, but still, many people were nervous that he wouldn't get his crowning moment at WrestleMania 20 against Triple H, especially once Shawn Michaels entered the picture and made the match a triple threat. But here, WWE did the right thing and had the crippler tap out trips at Madison Square Garden to finally achieve what he had only accomplished for one day in WCW, becoming the world champion. Chris Benoit's rise to the ranks of WWE, in spite of his limitations, was a welcome and surprising change of pace for the company. Number 3. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. We're doubling up again with this entry because, let's face it, Kevin and Sami's careers are pretty well intertwined, and between the two of them, they have had some very unlikely main event appearances. Owens and Zayn came up together in the Independents and were both close friends and bitter rivals over the years. Owens made his way to WWE and Zayn followed shortly after, and ever since then it's felt like both men have had to scratch and claw their way to gain respect. Night 1 of WrestleMania 38 in Dallas was historic in its own right. For the first time ever, the main event was technically an interview segment, as Owens hosted the KO show with his special guest, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Of course, it was a setup for the actual main event, an impromptu match between the two. It was Austin's first match in 19 years, and his chemistry with Owens was impeccable, considering the two had canonically just met moments before. Austin got the win in a hell of a return match in his home state, and Owens got his deserved time in the spotlight. Then there was Sami Zayn. A sentimental favorite since first coming onto the scene in NXT, Sami reached amazing heights in 2022 and 23 when he joined up with the Bloodline and became far and away the most interesting thing about it. Fans were overjoyed to see him finally stand up to the tyrannical Roman Reigns in defense of his old friend KO. The two faced off in the main event of Elimination Chamber in Montreal, and although Sami took the loss, there was no stopping his shine. He and Kevin had an emotional reunion leading to a big blow-off match on Night 1 of Mania in Los Angeles, Owens and Zayn versus the Usos for the Tag Team Championship. It was the first time since the first WrestleMania that the night ended with a tag team match, and the first time ever the tag belts got such a place of prominence on the card. In one of the best matches of the weekend, Owens and Zayn knocked Jimmy and Jay off their perch and reached the pinnacle of WWE together. Considering their unconventional looks, their history, and their background as indie darlings, the odds of all that happening in the first place are rare indeed. Number 2. The ladies. 35 years. That's how long it took for WWE to put women in the main event of WrestleMania. It's pretty ridiculous when you consider that a lot of the appeal of the first WrestleMania came from a storyline surrounding the Women's Championship. You don't need me to run down the entire sordid history of how women have been presented for much of WWE's existence. And given what we know now about Vince McMahon's alleged treatment of women in general, that whole embarrassing past takes on an even more skeezy tone. After being ridiculed and relegated to bathroom break status for decades, it took an entire shift in booking philosophy just for the ladies to get a taste of the upper card at a WrestleMania. The triple threat match with Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Charlotte Flair at Mania 32 was the first big step, and it finally led to history being made at Mania 35, when Lynch, Flair, and Ronda Rousey took part in the first ever women's main event match at the Showcase of the Immortals. And of course, we have to show love to Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, who tore the house down on Night 1 of WrestleMania in Tampa. Their time to shine wouldn't have been possible without the contributions of the other three ladies a few years earlier, not to mention all those who came before them. It's been awesome to see the evolution of female performers going from being eye candy and afterthoughts to featured players on WWE's most important event. Before I present my top pick, here are a few unlikely honorable mentions. First, another double shot. Lawrence Taylor and Bam Bam Bigelow. LT and Bam Bam share the honor of taking part in one of the weirdest Mania main events ever, a former pro football player in his one and only match against a worker who has a very solid hand but rarely in a position to make an impact that high up the card. But the fates put these two together as they closed out objectively one of the worst WrestleManias of all time. Taylor vs. Bigelow was not a great match, but given what they had to work with, they still did okay, and nothing was truly unforgivable. If it were any other year in the company's history, this match would not have gone on last, but 1995 was a rebuilding year. Mick Foley. From TV jobber to WrestleMania main eventer. Who else but Mrs. Foley's baby boy? We first saw Jack Foley on WWF television in late 1986, fresh out of Dominic DeNucci's wrestling school, where his jaw was literally broken from a clothesline courtesy of Dynamite Kid. With a less than amazing physique and an unconventional style, Foley's prospects in the Federation looked pretty slim, so he took on the name of Cactus Jack and spent years sleeping in his car, working the independents, and slowly making a name for himself in WCW, ECW, and Japan before finally debuting for the WWF as the Twisted Mankind in 1996. By the end of '99, Mankind became such an undeniable fan favorite that he ended up winning the championship 3 times that year. But years of huge risks and countless injuries left Mick's future at a crossroads, and in 2000 he walked away from full-time competition at the age of 36. But the company had the ultimate gold watch in store for Mick, inviting him back after losing a career-ending Hell in a Cell match to Triple H to compete in the Fatal 4-Way match for the title at WrestleMania 2000. Mick may never had the look of a WWF main eventer, but that was part of his charm. For him to get his big moment in the sun in the main event of Mania, after he'd already retired no less, is incredibly inspiring. And my pick for the #1 least likely WrestleMania main eventer is Daniel Bryan. Bryan Danielson is arguably the greatest wrestler of the 21st century. That being said, his involvement in WrestleMania 30 was anything but a given. Before getting signed, Danielson epitomized everything that WWE was not during their first decade of uncontested dominance. He stayed true to his gritty, independent roots until 2009 when he finally joined the company and swapped his name around to Daniel Bryan, debuting in NXT under his mentor and fellow Countdown occupant The Miz. Despite the company's attempts to portray him as a virginal vegan nerd over the years, the bad booking only seemed to inspire fans to like Bryan even more. Bryan seemed to receive the company's stamp of approval, successful when he beat John Cena for the WWE title at SummerSlam 2013, but this merely led to the formation of The Authority, with Triple H's turn on Bryan and anointment of Randy Orton. Bryan's fruitless attempts to regain the title were merely intended to fill up the fall programming, but fate intervened in early 2014. The new year saw the return of former world champion Batista, who had been away building up his acting resume. Big Dave won that year's Royal Rumble match, and the plan seemed to be in place. The former star comes back in a big way, becomes a conquering hero, and vanquishes Orton for the title at Mania 30. There was just one problem. The fans had already picked their hero in Daniel Bryan, who by this point was forced into the Wyatt family and was far, far away from the title picture. The fans saw through the company's bullshit and soundly rejected the animal, and basically anyone else who wasn't D-Bry. On top of that, CM Punk abruptly walked out of the company, leaving a gigantic hole in their Mania card. WWE had dropped the ball in a big way with Daniel Bryan those last several months, but not so badly that they couldn't pick it back up and run with it. Turning real-life strife into art, Bryan's emboldened fans created the Yes Movement, forcing their hero's way into the WrestleMania main event, as the Authority did everything within their power to keep him out of their decreed Orton vs. Batista match. Triple H even put himself in Bryan's way, leading to probably the best opener in Mania history not involving members of the Hart family, as Daniel would beat Trips to earn a spot in the main event. Then, in one of the most feel-good moments in modern history, Bryan forced Batista to tap out to become the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Danielson was up against the odds from day one in the company, overcoming his lack of size and a huge perception handicap from the higher-ups. He proved that big muscles and a flashy style aren't the only requirements to becoming an all-time fan favorite, and that every once in a while WWE does listen to their fans, and that's why Daniel Bryan's incredible story is what puts him at the top of my list of least likely WrestleMania main eventers. Did I miss anyone? What do you think of this list, and who else do you consider to have been an unlikely Mania main eventer through the years? Let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Zayn, and I'll see you next time.